Joe, and this is going to be on TikTok and History Barbarians, my history YouTube channel. And maybe I'll just post it also on Substack for fun, because I've been posting a lot of my history content over on Substack as well. So why not all three? The last duel. Now, this is a court case. Ironically, I first heard about, I think at some point in university, and I had to translate just one part of Froissart's chronicle about it for someone, and I didn't really think much about it. And one of my professors really liked this court case and thought it was really interesting, along with one other from the Wars of Religion. Yeah. And this is a court case where it involves two men primarily. Jean de
Carouge and Jean Legris. They are both of the Lord Pierre of Alençon, who is based out of Alençon. You can tell this is a movie of mine.
Yeah. And you, of course, have Marguerite de Carouge.
Yep.
Now, the court case involved a situation where, ironically, I got some heat years ago when I actually made a comment on Twitter, I think, with my old Twitter handle. Yes.
Going. But and book. It reads like a very formal fantasy book. I recommend it.
Okay. But what I ended up getting into some hot water over. Now, when the whole #MeToo thing burst out, and it covered like 10 years of history at this point, which I can't believe, but we can now say it's history.
Talk about
I will say this. A lot of the accusations were a little exaggerated. You know, there were a lot of false accusations. And the trouble is, I actually got some heat when I said, no, but with this court case, I'm pretty sure it was an actual violation that did happen. I got some heat because people said, no, she must have been lying. And I said, no, you don't know French history. And that netted me so much heat when I said, no, you don't actually know the French history. I've had to read the Chronicle. And this is where it ties in with some of my criticism at the end. But where I said, we have several records of this duel, and this was a big court case at the time. And the trouble is the guy didn't really have a good defense. Like, Legris had a terrible defense for the, well, she must have dreamt it up. You're not even trying. But we also know Legris had a history of these sort of actions. So this is like, we have a trend. Like,
a pattern of behavior.
Yeah. So to actually say, this is pattern recognition, I think is a catchphrase that's going on right now online. Well, Legris has a terrible history of violating women or sleeping around. And he didn't like taking no for an answer. Whereas Carouge, I will actually defend him. We know from his campaigns in Scotland, Hungary, France, he was a brave and noble defender of his country. The man fought bravely and even nobly, at his own expense sometimes, for his king. This was a man who, when...
In the film, we see that very clearly portrayed.
Yeah. Now, he was a good man, and the contrast could not be greater. Now, the trouble...
Legris is a courtesan, or a courtier. He's a man of the court, even though I would argue that he martially is even a little bit more adept maybe than Carouge, because he's a little bit savvier.
Well, I'll actually agree, and I'll say the thing is, at the time, Sam, every courtier had to be this man of the sword. It was a warrior aristocracy. Just to, not to interrupt or contradict, just to agree with you.
I was interrupting.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Legris is also a very competent soldier.
He is.
Yeah. These were two very, very competent soldiers, renowned in France for being two of the top, captains.
Well, if I may, so Carouge, at least I have not completed the book yet, but I do like it. It's the inspiration for an upcoming chapter, this sort of image that stuck with me about Carouge making this trip in the snow, going back and forth and them arguing about this. But I would also say that, I got. What we see too is the emphasis on these guys are of. I'm going to pause after this because I'm going to make kind of a contentious statement. These guys are of questionable nobility. They exist in a liminal zone where they are and are not. And I think that the zone is defined as follows. Are you or are you a knight? Do we call you sir? Do we call you squire? I wonder if, based on having read the record, do we consistently, rigidly, and with exacting detail, we hear Jacques Legree addressed, without fail, as Squire Legree or Squire Jacques Legree. We hear Carouge, Squire Carouge, or the heir to Belem, the captaincy of Belem, right? Which is also an office that's not noble, right? That's what we would today call a secular or a military type thing.
Although
But
Belem,
Carouge
Belem is a long and storied captaincy. It's a very prestigious office.
Right. But I wonder what you think about, like, is nobility because I mean, I'm assuming it comes from the divine. Is it something that can have a gray area?
There can be.
Yeah.
And Carouge is of noble blood, so he's automatically a nobleman.
We hear about his storied name often.
Yeah. And we know historically he was a knight.
Yes. And that is very, very important to him, much more than it seems other people, because there's a scene where he is like, you will address me as sir.
Yeah. In that regard,
is that a French thing? How would one address a chevalier en français?
Le sieur.
Le sieur.
Le sieur. That's the French translation of sir.
So
Monsieur.
Monsieur Jean de Carouge.
Why, Monsieur serait, well, you could use Monsieur, which is Mr., but you could also use it as two separate words. Monsieur.
Monsieur. That would probably be the more formal and classical.
Yeah, but even like as far back as like Saint Louis, I think people started using the term Monsieur.
Paper was expensive.
Monsieur, but Monsieur, no, wait, even going back to like the 12th century, I think it was Monsieur. Like Monsieur was very formal, very like clunky, and it phased out relatively quick. Monsieur is probably the more appropriate one. Monsieur le Chevalier. Monsieur le Capitaine de Belem. So it'd probably be like that.
And this was a position for life, if I'm not mistaken.
That would be for a knight. But that's actually very, like, I would never call Carouge Monsieur. I'd call him Monseigneur.
Okay, well that sounds
my
like
lord.
My lord. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't want to assume that you would be a peasant. I would certainly be a peasant.
I would certainly be. But the thing is, like, for example, the poet at the king's court would be called Monsieur, but every nobleman would be called Monseigneur.
Monseigneur.
Just out of, like, some people didn't do that. And some of the noblemen said Monsieur between each other, or Madame. But the thing is, when you're a peasant, you always use Monseigneur. It's just safer. It's interesting because a lot of them, even when they had, like, you look at, let me use an example, at certain poets who were servants to the king, even after 20 years of service, they'd say Monseigneur le Roi. They would never dream of anything less than that. And they'd even use, like, ducal poets would say Monseigneur le Duc. They would never dream of saying Monseigneur, Monsieur, in my experience, because it's just safer to, put that distance, that formal distance between you and them.
Yes. But I think that's what this movie does very honestly, is portray the stark divisions I like areas for story purposes. I feel like stories lend themselves very well, or times of conflict, which there just simply are. I feel like we're in one, lend themselves very well to drama, strife, and storytelling. And what we have here is a strife that is between, in some respects, what makes a nobleman. And what is true nobility? I would argue that there's a statement. Jean de Carouge views himself as a traditional knight.
Yeah.
Jacques Legree is a creature of the times.
And what's more is that your statement about true nobility, it's similar to something that Dunya, the greatest Korean drama, in my opinion, comments on. True nobility comes from the spirit and from the heart when it's directed upwards and to the service of others. And a true nobleman is a servant. That is what that drama said. And Carouge kind of echoes this sentiment. But what's one of my favorite scenes in this movie was when, he says, all right, here's the plan to his servants and to his, well, you can't say serfs because serfdom was over at that time.
We only have serfs in Russia at this point, I believe.
Well, it's ended. But he says to his peasants, all right, I need you to spread the story about the violation.
Mm-hmm.
Spread it far and wide. I want this to be gossip. He's like, and that's a scene I really do like. And he's
But these are men of position and women of position. One thing too is I like that it's my understanding that they faithfully portrayed the fact that this circle was not just men but their wives sitting next to them, which I think is good and an important note. Now we do need to note that the men were he was addressing the men. The wives were there. But also these are men though of station and taste. I mean they are wearing fine clothing.
Well, what's also
is still above them. They're in his domain, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
And he's got the thing with Carouge, though, is that it's hard for him to also, he's a bit of a, which term should I use? Historically, he had a bad reputation for also being greedy for land. And he was also in a tough pickle because he was as faithful to his lord as like a samurai like Akechi Mitsuhide once was. But like Mitsuhide, he was disliked by his boss. Mitsuhide chose to rebel. Jean de Carouge is not exactly in that position, but he can call upon a higher authority, the king. And the problem is, this is where we get into the particulars of this case, which is very fascinating. Carouge is loyal to the crown. And the trouble is...
King do we have right now? Who is this young-looking king?
Now, the king that Carouge was more familiar with was Charles V, who is one of the finest kings.
We call him in Anglais.
Charles V, known as Le Sage, the wise. He was one of the best kings in French history. And when his father and grandfathers, where they were failing against the English disastrously, Charles reversed the tide through cunning, diplomacy, and the loyal services of Bertrand du Guesclin as his Grand Maréchal de France, which is basically Grand Marshal, and also Bertrand utilized tactics that Robert the Bruce had used in Scotland to devastating effect against the English. So Bertrand, but it's not just
of all time, one of the great guerrilla warfare.
Yeah. And Bertrand didn't just, it wasn't just him. There were others like Carouge. Now, Carouge, by the time of this movie, is someone who has served Charles V faithfully for years. And so he's used to that king. And this was not liked by d'Alençon because Alençon was...
And for my Anglophones, we're talking about Pierre d'Alençon.
Okay, thank you. And he, for some reason, really didn't like Carouge. But Carouge, the thing is, had bankrupted himself in the service of France. And when Charles V dies, because he was very sickly, and his son, the mad, Le Fou, takes the throne, this young-looking king who appears at the end, Charles VI, he presides over the case. Now, Charles VI, or Charles VI, is destined, as everyone knows, to go completely bonkers.
I didn't know. I didn't know that, and I wanted to say this connects a dot for me in the films. Let me do a quick impression, and I mean this with respect. We're talking about the king, but for example, here's a moment at the end of the trial where the king, as is his right, decides ultimately what the fate of all parties will be, and he just sort of says, "All right, okay, we will proceed with the duel." Which, in terms of I'm exaggerating his body behavior, but I think it's an authentic representation of someone who maybe is not in his right mind completely.
Well, the thing is, I think at the time it's around 1491 that he goes bonkers.
Okay. So this king went. He went insane.
This is set in, I think, 1486, so it's a little bit before. I'm not sure. Like, I don't have an opinion either way about that presentation of him.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was like extremely negative necessarily.
No. I think I'm more in the middle on it. It's like, well, it's a portrayal. Like, I'm not going to sling mud at that because, well, you know. Honestly, you read the record on Charles VI. He was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. As the saying goes. When he went mad, for example, he suddenly started attacking and murdering his own guards.
That will not breed much loyalty.
But then, in turn, he would also rub himself in his own dung and would also believe that he was made of glass and thus no one could touch him and he had to be wrapped up in cloth.
That story, I did not know the history there, but I knew that there was a French king who thought himself made of glass, and for some reason that sounded poetic to me, or at least rife with drama.
It was. His wife was also promiscuous, and she took bribes.
She was French. Just kidding.
She took bribes from
the Germans. You dug on the Welsh. I'm going to dig on the French.
Okay, well, she took bribes from the English king, Henry V. Although what's interesting is Agincourt was followed by a disastrous catastrophe, Beaujeu, which was
mistaken, which is a pretty ignoble end, unfortunately.
Yeah, and which was a massive humiliation for Henry and even Charles VI's wife, because, you know, they had arranged and stitched everything up to just dissolve France. But then France goes and wins a major victory against England with the aid of the Scots. Yeah. So it's like...
We've got that again, this recurring... The Grande Alliance, I believe? What is it called?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Well, I thought it was the Grand Alliance, the Grande Alliance, or the...
L'Old Alliance.
The Old Alliance?
Yeah, the Old Alliance, AULD.
That reminds me of Auld Lang Syne.
But this was a Scottish-led French army. Mm-hmm. It's one of those fascinating things. Of course...
Good story.
Yeah, of course, you had... it was not the peak of the Old Alliance. I did a major paper on it at one point and wrote extensively.
I'm loving your nonfiction stuff. I don't mean that as a
no. It's fine.
And I think the reason I bring that up very quickly as a kind of like Sam soliloquy of annoyingness is to say that to me, like Substack, your platforms are your platforms, but Substack I think is very conducive and could provide some good kindling for that fire.
Thank you. I appreciate the kindly words. But this movie, I'll say one thing that annoyed me was the gray filter. Everything is gray. Yeah. This is not accurate to the medieval experience, which was very colorful and like vivid. And this is something I don't like about a lot of Ridley Scott movies. It's just there's that gray filter. And you're like, oh, come on, man. Have you never seen the color red or green or something? Like, put it in there. Yeah. You're killing me here.
You have a point. And a lot of his movies are that way. Except, to me, Kingdom of Heaven does a better job of this kind of Ridley Scott filter while still being vibrant. I mean, there are scenes that look like oil paintings.
Yeah. That movie did a lot better a job. I would say he helped produce Pillars of the Earth, and that one was a lot better in terms of color and whatnot.
Finally, I would encourage you to check out, this is a very underrated movie, the Ridley Scott Robin Hood adaptation.
Too gray.
Okay, but still more colorful than this. This is a very bleak film.
Well, because he basically put like a gray tarp in front of the camera.
Fair
It'd be better if it had color. That was a major thing that had me like,
yeah. Well,
because
we care about the aesthetics of things. I think we care about
yeah,
the presented.
yeah, and like I'll comment on the acting. Matt Damon was, as usual, really good. He's a good actor. He knows his craft. The actor who did Le Gris.
His name is Adam Driver, American.
He's a good actor.
Yeah.
Adam Driver. I've seen him in This Is Where I Leave You, and I've seen him in a few other movies. He's a phenomenal talent. He's a great actor, and he does a great job in this film. And the thing is, I think I'd like to see Adam Driver again in another movie, medieval setting and whatnot, or fantasy. And I think, like, let's get him in there. Let's let me think. He's the sort of character I'd want as like Tarascus from Hour of the Dragon, one of the main villains. He has a great vitality about him, and he'd also be good
but it's intelligence. He has a cunning too.
He'd also be good in as one of the Feanorians, maybe as Maglor, the good Feanorian. Because the hardest thing is
I'm kind of reaching back into the ultimate depths of my lore. I don't know if I'm familiar with that part of the. I'm sure.
Well, Maglor is the second son of Feanor, the guy who made the Silmarils. But Maglor was the good one who was redeemed, but who raised Elrond and Elros. But he later ended up
father of Arwen, and yes, okay.
But the thing with Maglor is he later tossed a Silmaril when it burnt his hand because he was corrupted. He tossed it into the sea and then wasted his life singing and crying by the sea. Very tragic story. But see, Adam Driver is one of those actors. I think that I've seen him in heroic roles, and I find him more compelling in them. His villain roles, he does a passable job, but he does a better job when he's thrust into a more heroic light. But I think that as a villain, he'd be good as Tarascus. And I think in terms of, let me see, he's good as Le Gris, but he could have done a little better. But I think Matt Damon was the one doing his very best in this movie. Driver was really good in scenes with Pierre d'Alençon and with Damon. He was really good with them.
Yep. I think a strong cast. That's my take overall.
I would say the female lead who played the wife was terrible.
Jodie Comer, I believe, a French actress.
She was terrible. And the trouble is, I felt that you have Driver and Damon trying to convey emotions and doing a good job, but you had her, it was like trying to squeeze water from a rock. And she looked good at times, but the problem is, like at the end, now I read Froissart's Chronicle.
Now I think Jodie Comer looks good all the time, but never mind.
But I found that in the Chronicle, what's interesting is there's a remark that after the duel, the lady and her husband had a very tender and emotional reunion after the duel.
Being Jean de Carouge.
Yeah, and the thing is, Marguerite apparently may have wept. The implication is, she was just so overwhelmed that her husband had won. So she broke down, and he then put her on a horse, and they rode off to Notre Dame de Paris, and they went to give thanks to God for his victory. And no one was more grateful than her.
Of course.
But in the movie, she doesn't even seem to react to her husband, surviving the duel. And it was like, I was just like, what?
I think that it's in the story. I mean, it's ahistorical. I haven't read the Chronicle or the record that you're referring to, but I trust you. Then it would mean that it's ahistorical while at the same time, we're kind of doing a Shakespearean adaptation where, I mean, Hamlet was a real person and a real prince of Denmark. Romeo and Juliet was a real long lyric poem that Shakespeare took from and just basically, again, talent borrows, genius steals. He took the names, but he made it his own thing. So I don't know. This is something that I try to do in my work, which is take the historical record and almost kind of just use it to kickstart things. And then you kind of weave in this story that takes care of itself. But
I get that. Yeah. I just think when it comes to stuff like this, let's at least keep little details like that.
Yeah, because they can be distracting for the attentive viewer.
It's just, I guess I also view historic fiction as also an educational tool.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to convey, in particular, the little emotional moments of humanity, what the hell is the point of you even doing this?
Amen.
And I just think the trouble with Ridley Scott is that he's always got a particular axe to grind, and he's and this might not win me too much affection, but I find he's a limited director. He's not as talented as he thinks he is. He's better as a producer than he is a director. And I know that's going to be a bit of a shock to some people.
I mean, I need to think about that, but I think you're right. I mean, because my response to that would be like, oh, he's great at fight scenes. Oh, he's great at verisimilitude, right? Having things look exactly as you would imagine they look down to in every detail. But at the same time, you have a point, because that does not make a director. That makes a kind of like maybe a second director, like an assistant.
Or a set designer. And the thing is just...
Ooh, now that, or a set designer. That's a downgrade.
Well, like, the thing with Gladiator, we have to bear in mind, as popular as that movie was, the historical consultant for the movie was so shocked by the changes Ridley wanted to make that she said, please don't associate me with this. You'll destroy my career as a historian. And he then did that. And she spent years then going, no, I was not actually consulting for that. They rejected all my advice. And the poor woman just got hounded by this movie because historians were like, this is what the hell is this historically? So Scott has he's got his problems, and he has his good points as a director and a producer. I will always sing the praise of Pillars of the Earth as a miniseries. He helped get that it would not have even gotten started without him. And he saw the value of the story. And the Croatian director, though, of Pillars of the Earth was a very talented director and combined Ridley's strength for set designing and production with his own directorial vision. And this really got Pillars to be a awesome hit. Well, maybe not a hit, but it was awesome to watch.
Yeah.
But this movie has its problems. I understand the idea of taking let's see it from Glee's perspective and Carouge's perspective and whatnot. And that can work. I just don't think it worked here. Mm-hmm. And I think the split narrative thing was too much for him. And he should have gone with a united, straightforward narrative.
We've got a 3 narrative going on.
Yeah, technically, yeah. Okay, so 3 narratives. I think that it was too much, and it should have been a little more contained and direct. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe he should have taken the traditional approach where it was a violation, because it's pretty evident from the record it was.
Yeah.
And just stick with that and tell the story classically. It's a very nice story. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those stories where you can't cock it up, and you can't, it's so straightforward.
Yeah.
But I found he did. He found a way. And I just wonder about that. How do you find a way? Because I even find the story of Narcissus, I think it is, the guy who killed Commodus, a fairly straightforward story.
A wrestler who strangled him. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, there's a great adaptation of the story on, ironically, Netflix. But Netflix is not usually good, I find, with movies. But with their history docudrama about Commodus, they did a fantastic job. But they nailed it. And
I
yet,
used to not really like those, but I did see the one that covered it served almost as a prequel to Shogun, which I know you dislike, but was an entertaining watch for me. But
well,
those can be good.
if you want a good docudrama, there's one on Beethoven from a few years ago. I'll have to find it. It's quite good. And
Being on Substack has surprisingly made me. You must feel this also, like busy. Like I have stuff I need to read. I've got meetings I need to, and I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
you're
it is like that. I've got a. Well, it's worse when like you're taking job interviews. So I got an interview tomorrow. I got all these things I have to read. I have to watch. And I'm in. Well, we're doing this kind of movie club, you and I, and I'm also doing a movie club with someone else on his platform. So it is very busy. But
duplicate efforts.
It takes a lot of energy. But like I said, this movie, if like the trouble is, some of Ridley Scott's weaknesses come in, and like Adam Driver and Matt Damon, I found were good, but it's some of the other stuff, the background stuff, the some of the directorial decisions, the filter, and the theme, and Jodie. These all contribute to a movie I found that was weak when it should have been strong, and that this was a you can't screw it up, but you did thing. Like the fight at the end was quite good, but I found that, and then there's the soundtrack, which didn't stick with me, which was a source of frustration for me because I like good soundtracks in movies.
Oh, the soundtrack, okay.
And this is now. I'll actually be honest. Pillars of the Earth had a killer soundtrack. I put it on and I just go frick. Like it just. I might put it on in the middle of this stream just for fun for you, Sam, if you want.
I love music.
Okay. Well, you're more of a musical genius than I will ever be. So
I make hip hop beats that no one wants to rap. And I think every writer needs a hobby outside of writing because you go crazy. And my hobby can't be marketing because it's making me wired. Like I'm used to selling stuff that is not very interesting. To me, my book is interesting. So talking about it to people is thrilling. And but it's also like, it's like you need to get some sleep, Sam.
But now you are selling interesting.
Sorry, what?
Yeah. All right. Now here's the song. Let me try to see if I can